That's not how the Force works. Hey guys, Matt here. This is my review of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. This movie is directed by J.J. Abrams, who previously directed Star Wars The Force Awakens, as well as the new Star Trek trilogy. The movie stars Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac. In 2015, when they first announced they were doing a seventh Star Wars film, I got excited because I'm a fan of the franchise. I was a little concerned, however, because I didn't know how involved the original actors were going to be. What roles were Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie, maybe Lando going to play in this new franchise, if at all? So, this new franchise, imagine, if you will, a father teaching their child how to ride a bike for the first time. The father's holding on, guiding, directing, doing most of the work. Eventually, the child will pick it up, become better, and eventually they'll say, "Okay, Dad, I got this." But the father still holds on. I originally thought the original cast were going to appear in Episode 7, wrap up their individual storylines, while essentially passing the torch to the new cast. But the original cast have become mainstays in this franchise. They've almost salvaged something these new characters are unable to maintain on their own. So now, whenever people hear about a new Star Wars film, they're usually thinking one of two things. Either, ooh, a new Star Wars movie, I can't wait to see what new characters or what paths Rey, Kylo, Poe, Finn take, and what this story brings us. Or they're thinking, ooh, new Star Wars movie. I can't wait to see the bits of nostalgia and the characters that we know and love, or the things that are carried over from things we're familiar with. And I think it's safe to say that this new sequel trilogy needs help. And The Rise of Skywalker is proof of that. Now, I'm not sure where to start, so let me start with Rey. Daisy Ridley. Now, I thought it was really neat that they made the new Luke Skywalker character, the new Force-sensitive character, a female. It was different. We hadn't seen it before in the other movies, so this was a nice change. Rey started out just like Luke, this, young hero discovering Force powers. But then she exceeded all expectations. She's made Luke look like a novice. In this movie, Rey's powers are so fantastic, so strong, she's so powerful that, just like the movie Lucy, once you maintain a certain kind of power, a certain amount of it, it seems like nothing can hurt you. And that's what we get with her character using her Force abilities. She's so strong that regardless of the situation that they're in, there's no real danger because Rey, who's now this all-powerful Force-sensitive person, can get herself and others out of a jam without breaking a sweat. She hardly takes any damage. There's nothing she can't do, so because of that, there's no stakes. Poe and Finn are really good in this movie, and they're really funny. I'm glad we got to see the the sequel trilogy trio together in this movie. The other ones, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get to see these friends together on screen in scenes. But now we do. Yes, they do bicker quite a bit, but it's nice to see them together because you feel the bond. Now, C-3PO is back. He's very funny. It's good to see him again. BB-8 is there, but aside from interacting with the other droids in the movie, BB-8 is not very important in this film. Kylo Ren. Ben Solo, played by Adam Driver. He was really good in this movie because his character was the one that brought the emotion. He's the one that brought the drama. His interaction with Rey is really the only emotion out of these characters that you get. Him and Rey, they drove this story forward. There are other characters in this movie, a couple of them new characters, and there's some returning characters, like Rose. She's also in this. Now, this movie has a lot of problems, and one of them is that unless you're Rey, Kylo, Finn, or Poe, you're not given a lot of screen time, therefore you're not given a lot of things to do. As I said, Rose is back in this movie. There's a woman that Finn meets on a planet, and there's also a woman that Poe is familiar with on a different planet. And yes, it's nice to see new characters introduced, but we're given no time to get to know them. There's a new little alien creature named Babu Freak who's pretty funny. We don't get to see him very much, but he almost steals the show. Back to C-3PO for a second. C-3PO is very funny in this movie. Chewbacca is in this as well, and he actually makes his presence felt. He's not just a tag-along. And that's the problem you kind of face when you have groups of characters, is some of them are going to be just there in the background. Chewbacca is there this time around, because he kind of faded in The Last Jedi. He was just another character. Alright, so I'm not going to lie. J.J. Abrams seemingly said, okay, I see what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi, so we're going to ignore that. We're going to omit that. We're going to make the storyline move around it, involving as little of that storyline as possible. Because let's face it, J.J. Abrams is a fanboy. He likes this franchise. That's why he has all the nostalgia, all the things you're familiar with, all the feel-good moments. Whereas Rian Johnson, his theme in that movie, The Last Jedi, was the past is dead. Kill it. Forget the past. So that's why he decided to do all those drastic decisions he made with certain characters, certain plot lines, certain decisions that seemed kind of abrupt and unnatural. But because J.J. Abrams is the fanboy, he brings these things back. He decides, no, I like these things this person didn't like, so I'm going to include them. And the big bad villain in this film. If you haven't seen the trailers, I can't tell you who the villain is, but I will say the villain makes their presence felt, literally and figuratively. And when I say that, I mean the first line of the opening classic scroll is that, here's the villain. And because we get this villain in only one movie, without any build-up, there's no gravity. And that's going to lead me to my next point with this movie. Is you have this big bad villain who's here and causing havoc and is making their presence felt, but unlike Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter franchise, unlike Thanos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise, if there's no hints that this bad guy is coming, when the bad guy arrives, you're like, oh, okay, it's neat that there's a new threat in town, but because you didn't give us any heads up, there's no time to react. That's another issue with this movie, is there's no gravity. There's no drama. There are 6 instances involving 5 characters, C-3PO, Chewbacca, General Hux, and a couple others, where something happens that's supposed to invoke a reaction from the audience. Something is supposed to make the audience go, oh my gosh, or did they just do that? Or, whoa, what a surprise. But these things are erased in the next scene. They're taken back shortly after. There's decisions, bold decisions, that J.J. Abrams decides to do in this film, but just like Terminator Dark Fate, he makes a decision and then a little bit later goes back on it. So it makes you scratch your head and wonder, why did they decide to do that if they were just going to retroactively correct it later on? It makes it meaningless and takes away the drama, the shock, the surprise, the emotion he was trying to go for. This movie also does something where, just like the Saw franchise, and even kind of in the Harry Potter franchise, even though that was a more emotional take on it, this film decides to do the classic thing where, because they didn't think of an idea originally way back when, they decide to retroactively make this fact known. For example, in the Saw movies, you have your main storyline of 7 films. You have your actions taking place, your characters making decisions, this and that. But then later in the franchise, they like to do this thing where they say, okay, you know how we had these characters do these things in these movies? Well, hold on to your butts, because we're going to show you stuff that we didn't acknowledge, things we didn't establish, things we didn't make apparent in the previous films. Why are we doing this? Oh, well, this is only being done to help the current narrative, the current story. We're making this flashback. We're taking you back and showing you the behind-the-scenes, off-screen type stuff to help our current storyline right now in this moment to make sense so we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Speaking of sabotaging yourself and shooting yourself in the foot, the villain is nice to see in this movie. They present themselves well. They're very well acted, and there's some cool moments involving the villain. But the villain is only there because of the events of The Last Jedi and what happened with Snoke. And because he was eliminated, quite literally, they had no villain. They had no antagonist. So almost on the fly, they introduced this big bad villain. And with him, we do get a First Order-like element, which is neat because it felt like the Empire from the original series. It made you feel like, oh wow, these are big bad guys, and they're a force to be reckoned with, including a character played by Richard E. Grant. Even though he is Tarkin 2.0 in this film, I was okay with it. Speaking of 2.0s, the Knights of Ren are introduced in this movie. I'm sorry. They were introduced in The Force Awakens, but it was so brief that you probably forgot. So they're brought back in this movie. And just like Captain Phasma, just like Boba Fett, just like every other Stormtrooper, Shock Trooper, Death Trooper, Sith Trooper, whatever trooper that's a different color than white, that's supposed to be badass and tough and strong, they're wasted. Alright, now, the plot of this movie is very, very weak. It is essentially characters looking for something. So they have to go to one location to find a clue that brings them to another location that may provide insight to go to another location to where they might find something to where it might lead them to the destination. If it sounds a lot like a scavenger hunt, that's because it is. If you've ever played the Resident Evil games, they have this problem of, they're entertaining, but if you look at them like realistically, they have this issue of saying, okay, if you want to get into room A, you have to go into room B and find this certain item. And then you have to bring it back to room A, and then you have to open the door with something that was in another room. That's what this movie is. It's a scavenger hunt. Some of them are like, okay, that makes sense. You need this to unlock that, to do that. But some of them are just silly. There's something involving I'll say a blade, like a knife, that's used in the movie, and it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah, there's a plot thing involving C-3PO and the blade, which was interesting because the droids haven't really been used in that fashion before, but essentially the blade just becomes a gimmick, and it's like in Step Brothers when they were like, why do you have Randy Jackson's autograph on a samurai weapon? That's what it becomes. It becomes silly, and it's like, you don't have any ideas, so you're making a scavenger hunt to waste time. And the scavenger hunt's even pointless because the group goes to a location. They say, all right, we're going to stick together to solve this problem. And then Rey wanders off due to Kylo Ren's mind flirting manipulation thing, leaving her friends behind and in danger, and then she has to save the day with her like Superman powers. That happens 3 times in this movie. 3 times. One on this Mardi Gras desert planet. Second, on this ship in this small town called Kamenji or something like that. And then again on this other planet where there's a bunch of old wreckage that looks familiar. Rey doesn't know how to stay with her group. She's like the kid that wanders away. She's like the kid that wanders away in the mall when your parent says, stay here, don't wander off. All right, now to the best part of the movie. It's the nostalgia. It's the things that J.J. Abrams was like, well, this is the end of the saga, the 9 movies, so we're going to incorporate Sith, Jedi, light side, dark side, everything from the prequels, everything from the original trilogy. Here you go. But because there's so many of those moments, it sacrifices the plot. Yes, there are some really cool moments, and in my opinion, every movie has that moment or that scene, at least to me. First movie, Force Awakens, to me, had Chewie We're Home with Han Solo. The second movie had the throne room lightsaber fight. This movie has 2 scenes, but unfortunately, they're both nostalgia trips. I can't tell you what they are in fear of spoilers, but it's nothing from the original cast. Now, as I said, this is the end of the Skywalker Saga, so was it epic? Was it a good conclusion? Did they wrap everything up? Yes and no. It was a nice conclusion to the Skywalker Saga. It was a nice tribute to the Sith lore and the Jedi lore that they had to work with from the prequels. That was really nice. The ending to this movie, along with a couple scenes in the third act, almost had me tear up. Almost had me crying. But again, there were things involving original characters. And not a whole lot of new characters, so that says something. The ending of this movie was emotional. And by the end, if you're a Star Wars fan, you will really appreciate what they do. This film was a nice conclusion to the Skywalker Saga and the franchise as a whole. However, it is a bad conclusion to this new sequel trilogy. Because J.J. Abrams wanted to skip over, gloss over, and omit things from the previous film, he decided to make a sequel to The Force Awakens as opposed to taking what Rian Johnson had established and working with it and going off of that. So because J.J. Abrams decided to go back to do his own thing, he crams almost 2 movies into one. And it hurts the plot, hurts the flow, hurts the story. Because this film is messy and clunky, and there's a lot of things crammed into one film. And this plot, especially the third act, follows the plot of Avengers Endgame very closely. Watch this movie and pay attention. There's a lot of similar elements from something that worked. It's now put into something that doesn't work. So, because this movie has tons of nostalgia, feel-good moments, but a weak plot, I'm going to give Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker a C-. Congratulations, Disney. You've had one hell of a year with your Disney classic remakes. You've succeeded with Marvel and the MCU. But unfortunately, you failed Star Wars. So until next time, guys, see ya. And may the Force be with you.